So now we are moving on to another block of 45 minutes. It's the same role. We will have EO providers, but also people from the policy side. They will discuss about accounts for the Green Deal. The block will discuss how Earth observation could be integrated into official statistics from three perspectives: environmental indicators, the SDGs indicators under the 2030 agenda, and then the ecosystem accounting. For that, we have also a moderator. This session is fully online, and the moderator is Mark Paganini. He's a technical officer from the European Space Agency in the Division of Science Application and Climate Department. He has more than 25 years of experience organizing, manages, elaborating novel applications of Earth observation and information services. He also is working and represents SEEA in multilateral environmental agreements like the UN Convention of Climate Desertification or Biodiversity. So for those online, Mark, now I hand it to you, and I hope you have 45 minutes to round up this. Thank you.
Thanks, Monica, for inviting me to moderate these sessions of the Green Deal dialogue, which we decided to call Accounts for Green Deal, but which is essentially about mainstreaming Earth observation into official statistics on sustainable development and on the environment. So we have organized, as you said, this session is 3 dialogues on environmental indicators, on SDG indicators, and on ecosystem accounts. But I would like to start this session with the importance of data in the European Green Deal and in the 2030 agenda, because it's widely recognized that the success of the SDGs and of the European Green Deal depends on the availability of high quality data that is universally accessible. And I must say that a robust implementation of these policies requires a solid framework of indicators and consequently reliable statistical data to measure, monitor, and report progress, to inform policies, but also to ensure accountability of all stakeholders. So this requires the collections, processing, analysis, and disseminations of what I would call an unprecedented amount of data and statistics at multiple levels and produced by a large range of stakeholders, which go beyond the traditional household or ecological surveys that countries have been exploiting to assess their development and environmental policies. So this implies the adoption of new technologies, new data sources in the activities of the national statistical offices and the environmental agencies, and the integration of geospatial data, including satellite observation, into national statistical and environmental programs. So Earth observation was presented as a game changer for countries to fully achieve their sustainable development goals, but also their environmental targets. But in practice, we still have not fully achieved all the potential that Earth observation can bring to the global and European policies on sustainable development and on the environment. And there have been a number of obstacles that hinder really fast uptake of Earth observation in these policy agendas. I should mention the restrictive data policies, no long-term continuity of satellite observation, insufficient frequency of observation to track the changes at appropriate scale, or the lack of clear guidelines. And in the recent years, especially with the emergence of ambitious Earth observation programs such as Copernicus, many of these challenges have been removed or at least reduced. And that's what we want to discuss with our panelists today. Where do we stand with the uptake of Earth observations into national statistics on sustainable development and on the environment? And what are the main obstacles that still hinder a full integration of Earth observation in national monitoring and reporting? So the first dialogue will be between Christian Hoffmann, the CEO of Geoville, and Gebhard Banko from UBA, the environmental agency of Austria. This dialogue will address the production of environmental indicators on ecosystems and biodiversity. And these are really key policy targets in the new European Union biodiversity strategy for 2030, and also in the European Green Deal, of course. And I must say here that the Convention on Biological Diversity is currently conducting a major revision of its biodiversity target with ongoing negotiation on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And in Europe, this biodiversity strategy for 2030 is really an ambitious and long-term plan to protect nature, but also to reverse the degradation of ecosystems. And this strategy stressed that the fight against biodiversity loss must be underpinned by strong science, investment in research and innovation, in knowledge exchange, which includes Earth observations. So let me introduce the two panelists. Of course, everybody knows Christian Hoffmann in this arena. Christian is an Earth observation enthusiast, as he likes to call himself, and he founded GeoVille already 25 years ago with the vision to provide better data for decision making. And I must say it's one of the lead SMEs now in Europe and probably as well in the world for land monitoring. And our policy expert in this dialogue will be Gebhard Banker. So Gebhard started his career at UBA in 22 in the Department of Biodiversity and Nature Conservation, where he's been the project leader for the Austrian Marine Land Cover database. And he acted as well as the national representative for land cover and spatial analysis in the IONET network of the European Environmental Agency. So I will give the floor first to Gebhard to explain briefly what are the environmental indicators that are currently being implemented at UBA and initiate the discussion with Christian. So Gebhard, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for the short introduction. And indeed, we are really living in a very digitized world now. So not only because of our digital format here, but more and more very important data sets are getting available for our environmental monitoring. And as we will be talking later on, especially what I think the integration of data. I mean, this was a very strong focus on Earth observation, that it is spatially explicit, that you can say where something is happening on whatever scale you have. And until now, we had a lot of statistical data on national or European level. But now having more and more spatial, explicit way of looking at things. And this is also reflected in the new LULUCF regulation, where you try to move up to more spatially explicit tiers. And I really think this is the big game changer, and Earth observation paved the way. And so thinking in this direction, I also would have the first question that I take the chance to talk to Christian. I mean, you have this long experience, but out of your view, I mean, to support the production of environmental indicators, so what do you think should the EU operational services be leveraged to?
Well, thank you very much, Gebhard. Thank you very much, Mark, for this kind introduction. To answer your question, how to leverage, I see three elements that are key. Now, element number one is for me the supply side, and we need to secure the supply side. This is standardization of products, it is guaranteed quality, it is availability. And the latter is extremely important. We need to guarantee continuity. And continuity means also to have access, permanent access to space data. And in this instance, it is really of big importance that the replacement of the Sentinel-1 is being done as soon as possible, and that is being that we can guarantee a continuity on the supply side. The second issue for me is the regulatory side. And we must make sure that Earth observation becomes an accepted standard and an agreed standard. There is the big success of the agricultural controls, which started in the early 90s. And Earth observation has been all these years been operationally used. Now it is the monitoring, the greening of the greening agenda, monitoring. So that will be a probably even bigger success. Earth observation has been defined as an element in the land use and land use change and forestry standard. So it is really the regulatory side that needs to be looked at. And last but not least, I would like to mention the geopolitical side. It is we have just learned that from now on. Copernicus information services indicators will be or can be also produced from organizations from overseas or having their seat in overseas. So I think that this is, of course, on the one hand, it will weaken the European industry, it will weaken the European science organizations. But on the other hand, I also doubt that this will help to the full adoption of European stakeholders of the products. Because when you produce a standardized information layers such as land cover, which provide a basis for generating indicators, and if these are produced overseas, certainly they will not help to have the acceptance of European stakeholders such as the UBA or such as other national environmental agencies.
Thanks, Christian. On your side, do you have any questions you would like to ask on the policy aspects to Gebhardt? Actually, you address a few of them in your response, but I guess that you have a very specific question to ask to Gebhardt.
Yes, Gebhardt, I would be really excited to know, and I know it, of course, but I would like that you describe to the audience how UBA is already integrating Earth observation into national environmental indicators. You have been always a forerunner on this, and it would be really great for the audience if you could give us a few examples related perhaps to land monitoring, to biodiversity, or to soil indicators. I think this is really interesting, and the work that you have been doing in UBA for the last 20 years is really really remarkable on that side. Gebhardt, please.
Thank you, Christian. I mean, if I think back to our joint development, I think it was in 2004 when Copernicus still was called GMES, that we started this Soil Sage project dealing with soil sealing. And at that time, I had the feeling we tackled all the main political fields, if I say soil, biodiversity, climate, but at that time, we really did it separately. So we dealt with soil, but now under the umbrella of the Green Deal, all these three components, for example, they get a lot more interactive. And so, for example, on soil sealing, we for example, the Copernicus high resolution imperviousness layer is a great data source for us. So we use it for describing ecological corridors, because it's not only the quantity, but it's especially the spatial location. If you think of how our urban areas develop, we have to still have place for green corridors, not only for animals, but also for human beings. And this is what we integrate in our indicators on ecological corridors. At the same time, we are running into biodiversity. We can later talk on this 30% pledge that is out, so to restore ecosystems. So in the same time, it serves another purpose as well. So we are looking into the state of our habitat. So what is the state of their condition? And for example, fellings throughout the year is very, very likely to be observed using the new HRL on phenology and productivity. So we put pieces together, and in addition, we integrate more and more our national data, because we have learned using remote sensing products to think in this spatial explicit way. And of course, the last example would be from climate. LULUCF has been mentioned in the talks before as well, where we have launched a really large proposal for the integration of Earth observation into the national greenhouse gas reporting, which is really not an easy task, especially for a small alpine country like Austria, where we have a lot to do with a transversal exchange of the atmosphere. And
thanks, Gebhardt. They are all very nice examples, but maybe you have still time for the very last question to Christian, and then maybe at the end of these sessions, we'll open the floor to Q&A. But I'm sure you have another questions to Christian.
Yes, so thinking of our history, Christian, what do you think is still lacking really to fully harness this potential of Earth observation? I mean, to produce national environmental indicators. You know a lot on European and national indicators, and you have a lot of insights from the production point of view.
Thank you, Gebhard. Well, for me, there is still a gap between what EO can provide, how it is marketed, and what is really needed. We are all still super excited about maps, and it's not maps that are needed. It's statistics. A map cannot express variance of measurements like a conventional statistic. So it is really, and you mentioned we have been working together for many, many years, and this is where we learned from you what is really required at the end of the day when you produce a report. And we have always tried to put this forward to understand really the vertical needs at the of the food chain. What is exactly required? How does it need to be presented, and how has it to be delivered? And it is, again, it is not a map. It is statistics, and sometimes it's 1 or 2 or 3 figures with the confidence interval that are making the success of a delivery. With all the complex analytics that have gone into it before, however, in the end, it is in the very few cases a simple map. It is much more, and it is a statistics, so it's an indicator. And that's what we have really learned in working with you guys for the last 20 years.
Thanks, Christian. Thanks, Gebhard. I think it's a nice transition actually to the next discussion on the SDGs. I thank you a lot. I think you raised a number of very important points, like the spatial explicit data, standardization, continuity of observation, and the fact it's not only about maps, it's also about statistics. So let's move now to the second dialogue with Christian Tottrup from DHI and Kevin McCormack from the Central Statistical Office of Ireland. And this dialogue will discuss the use of Earth observation to inform SDG indicators. So I must say that mainstreaming technical innovation to fill the data gaps and mobilizing, I'm using the word, mobilizing the data revolution to overcome inequalities between data poor and data rich countries, leaving no one behind, were and are still really high priorities of the 2030 agenda. And in that context, geospatial information and Earth observation were seen as a really key source of data for countries to fully achieve their sustainable development goals. And now, I must say that with the SDG agenda reaching its midway to 2030, we would like to discuss with the 2 panelists here the progress we made on the uptake of Earth observation in SDG processes, and what are the opportunities and the challenges that are still lying ahead of us to fully integrate Earth observation within the national monitoring and reporting systems on SDGs. So the 2 panelists are Christian Tottrup and Kevin. Christian is a geographer specialized in GIS and remote sensing. He has a really wide experience in the use of Earth observation data in many areas and in many scales, and always with a geospatial data analytics perspective. So he's thinking as well, not only maps, but also indicators and statistics. And to discuss the importance of Earth observation for the SDG indicators, we've invited Kevin, and he's one of the lead person on the subject. He's a senior statistician in charge of the SDG indicators and reports at the Central Statistics Office of Ireland. And is also a member of this UN interagency and expert group on SDG indicators, in which he's co-chairing the working group on geospatial data. So I would like to give first the floor to Kevin, to the policy expert, to initiate the dialogue and briefly explain the importance of geospatial information and Earth observation in the global indicator framework of the SDGs. So Kevin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark, and hello to everybody. So as Mark said, Central Statistics Office is very hard to say in English, all those S's. It's a very difficult way to say. So well done, Mark. He was a good attempt to say it. So I'm, as Mark says, I'm head of the SDGs in the Central Statistics Office here in Ireland. I'm part of the interagency expert group in SDGs, and I co-chair the WGGI. So today what we have is a number of questions, and it's a piece of table tennis, I suppose. I'm going to ask some questions and then Christian will come back and we'll go back and forth. We have a short period of time, so I'll just start with the first question, Christian, if you don't mind. So the first question is, what are the most effective ways to encourage the private sector to actively contribute to supporting the monitoring and reporting of the SDGs? So over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. And yeah, that's a good question. I mean, maybe adding to what Mark was telling about my background, and for the past years, I've actually been quite heavily involved in the data science behind the progress reporting on SDG 661 on change in water-related ecosystem. And that's really one of the indicators which is purely driven by this observation data. So that's my key entrance into the discussion. And that also means, I mean, the incentive currently for us and why we ended has been driven by the custodian agency, the UNEP, but also by space agencies like ESA, who has funded it. Also some efforts in terms of developing the methodologies that can be adopted. But back to the UNEP part, what they realized when we had the first data drive was that when they went to countries to ask for information on 661 on the freshwater ecosystem, they found that it was, I think, less than 20% of the countries who were able to report on that indicator. And the data they received was of poor quality and spatially and temporally not representative. So the response was to turn to the space agencies and to take partners to develop global data products to fill that information gap. So that means we are in a situation where we have the global data, we can report it globally for all countries, but I think that's not the ideal situation. I mean, we really want that national ownerships of the SDGs. So, and that's where maybe I still need to see the clear road for the private sector in terms of seeing these national funds raised for engaging the private sector in developing national indicators on not only 661, but also the other indicators, which is very amendable to report on using Earth observation data. And that could maybe be the counter question is, I mean, what are the main obstacles at the national level to integrate Earth observation solution, and how do you see a role for the private sector in trying to overcome those obstacles?
Yeah, okay, so from my view, it's more an understanding on the opportunities of EO. That's really the question. EO in the NSOs, EO can almost be black magic. It's not known, it's not a skill set that's commonly within the NSOs, or in many government line management institutions or agencies or and so forth. So it can be difficult. The way forward that we have approached it in Ireland is to coordination, data governance board, forums, getting the people together. I would suggest for the private sector, engage nationally with the SDG focal points. That would allow you to understand the requirements, but also the challenges. And I think that's the key piece. So from my work in the WGGI, what we have done is that we've produced a geospatial roadmap where we're trying to build a bridge between the statistical and geospatial community. And part of there's 3 phases. The first phase is coordination, getting the people together virtually, physically, whichever way it can be, or so people can understand exactly what the challenges are, what the opportunities are, where the pinch points are, where the difficulties are, how that's overcome. Of course, resources are needed, so one wants to be as efficient as possible, and that's another part that must be understood from my point of view in it. But certainly, communication, coordination, governance, and standards are very important in terms of national statistical institutions. We have UNGGIM standards, we have statistical standards, and it's very clear that they should be used in any discussions in this particular space. And I think there's a lot of work has been done by a lot of very experienced people in this particular space, and utilizing all that previous work, I think, would be the way forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. And I'm sure you have another questions to Christian. Huh?
Yeah.
I mean, so we heard some success stories, but okay, I'll leave the floor to you.
So I suppose one of the key questions is, what is the guarantee you can give to the national statistics offices that EO data and services can be made available operationally up to 2030 and beyond, and fully supported the SDG monitoring and reporting?
Thanks. I think for that one, and then maybe since we don't have that many examples yes on the SDGs, I will be looking at some of the other key developments happening. And I think it was mentioned previously that one of the key developments in EU currently is the use of Earth observation for the monitoring under the Common Agricultural Policy. And there you'll see a number of countries who's taking up Earth observation data to implement time-critical monitoring systems. So my answer there would be, if they can do it, I mean, we can also do it for the SDGs. But that's only part of the you can say the guarantee, because the other one is on the data side, and there we probably need to push back to Mark here. And I mean, that would be the space agencies who needs to guarantee the missions. And then we just here in the beginning of this year saw the failure of Sentinel-1, which was suddenly causing some concerns, you know, in terms of the continuation of the deliverable. So I think we are making good progress in terms of having tandem missions. Like we have Sentinel-A/B satellites, but maybe we need a C satellite as well, you know, to really ensure that the system is backed up and can deliver the continued data. But importantly, I think from ESA's perspective is that have secured the funding for the satellites until 2030 and beyond, I think. So we know there will be succeeding missions coming up until 2030, which combined with the progress we are making in terms of analyzing and providing the data and indicators should give you a good guarantee for us to be able to deliver.
Thanks, Christian. I mean, it's not only ESA, I mean, it's also the European Commission. I think the Commission owns the Copernicus programs and is a source of almost all the budget. But yeah, I'm looking at the time. I think we still have the time for a very last question that you could ask to Kevin.
Yeah, maybe, I mean, and that's maybe touching a bit on what you, Kevin, you mentioned about the communications and collaborations thing. I mean, in terms of engaging the private sector, and I see there's a number of different collaboration models. One's, as I mentioned, with the custodian agency directly in terms of developing the methodologies, and but it could also be, you know, working as standard consultancies, delivering the indicators directly to the NSOs, or it could be trying to empower countries, you know, with the data and tools so they can do the monitoring independently. And there, I'm not quite sure which is, and if there is a preferred model and what's happening in the discussion in the UN SDG forums and things. Is it these different collaboration models needs to work in parallel, or is there a vision for how the ideal scenario would be?
Yeah. So the ideal scenario is that the governmental agencies are empowered. But we know that's not going to happen. There's a variety of developmental, and people have maturity in this particular areas, you know, across the UN member states. So it is going to be a parallel approach, mixed mode approach, different ways and different things. But certainly one of the key pieces is to be standard. The approach is being standard. It doesn't matter who is doing it, the approaches should be the same, and the tools, technology should be the same. It's either, you know, it can be freeware, it can be otherware. It's not an issue. But as we have already said here today, the data is very important. In Ireland, certainly from our NSO, we've been actually working in this particular space, and we've been looking at it, and we certainly looked at the vegetation index, the mountain green index cover, and then measuring and visualization nitrogen dioxide emissions. And we're looking at different geographies. Our lowest geography in Ireland is enumeration area, and it's 3,409 geographies in it. So it's quite detailed, down to about 300 households. So we see it as an opportunity. Yet again, from an NSO approach, we have to prove to our Director General that this will work. So I'm heavily in this particular space. I'm very much an advocate for it. But yet again, I still have to prove to my Director General that what we're actually doing can actually work and can either supplement or replace current surveys for the data that's actually there. So that's a key piece of information that has to be understood. And certainly from the private sector, you can't just come and say, listen, we have a solution. You know, there has to be the dialogue. It has to be the connections. And it's a terrible word to say, but somewhat political. You know, it has to be understood that, you know, this is the way to do it. It's new methodology. it's the way forward. Within the statistical community, we have the GSBPM, which is our statistical business process model. And in the new version of that, which I'm part of the group that's working on it, we are putting in geospatial information as something that's actually required. And in geospatial information, it also encompasses Earth observations. So the door has been open in terms of the models and the frameworks that are actually there. And I think it's up to certainly someone like me who at the UN level to actually push that agenda and then work with different groups like the private sector to see how that can be brought together. And as I said previously, we have a geospatial roadmap that's there, and we're hoping that both sides will actually use that, both supply and demand. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Kevin. I think it was a very nice discussion. So, I mean, I take the points of it's important, and of course, that the NSOs and the Earth observation community collaborates very well and build trust. And we got, again, the same points regarding the quantity of observations, the standards, and a number already of success stories, and that's good. So let's move now to the third dialogue. That will be between Bruno Smets from Vito and Sven Kalmans from the Statis. And here we are going to touch something new, which is this new international standards on ecosystem accounting, which was developed under the auspices of the SEEA. I don't know if I think some of you know what it is. It's the UN system for environmental economics accounting. And this ecosystem accounting was adopted last year in March 2021 as a new international statistical standards to integrate ecosystems and their services in national accounting. I must say it's a real paradigm shift in the appreciation and evaluation of natural capital, since it allows countries to use a common set of rules to track change in ecosystem stocks, so ecosystem extent and conditions, and related flows of ecosystem services, and to link this to economic and development activities. So in Europe, Eurostat is currently working on a new regulation on ecosystem accounting, and which will amend the current regulations on environmental economic accounts. So here the two panelists, we have Bruno. Bruno joined Vito Remote Sensing a bit more than 12, 13 years ago, and he's been leading a number of Copernicus Lens services, both at global and pan-European scales. And now he's the head of the natural capital account. So this company has created a natural capital account team at Vito, and I must say that Bruno has been really advocating for the integration of Earth observation ecosystem accounting. And then our policy expert is Sven Kalmans, is the head of the environmental economic accounting and sustainability reporting at the Statis. And since I think it's 2014, he's been member of the UN Committee of Experts on Environmental Economic Accounting, and also of the London Group on Environmental Accounting, which is sharing for which has been sharing for the last 5 years. So I will first give the floor to Sven. I mean, he's the policy expert here, to start the discussion and present briefly this new statistical framework on ecosystem accounting. So Sven, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon all together. Good afternoon, Bruno. Thank you that you invited me, and thank you that you are here to discuss with me how you could support the development of ecosystem accounting. Mark already said we have in use UN standard since approximately 2 years called System of Environmental Economic Accounting. So what is environmental economic accounting? You already said that there's something like ecosystem extent and condition, but in the end, the main target of environmental accounting is to have something comparable like the GDP for the services that the environment, that the ecosystems create for the society, for the economy, for the peoples. We call them final ecosystem services. But the nice thing is, as always in accounting, that you can look at these results from different angles. So if you're an expert in national accounts, you know that you can calculate them from the demand side or from the supply side and so on. And we can do these things in ecosystem accounting, of course, as well. And one side, or one way to look at ecosystem accounting is to look at the extent of the ecosystems, to the services or to the conditions these ecosystems have, and in the end try to estimate from the extent and their condition which kind of services they can provide. And I think this is the way how we can use Earth observation data in calculating these results. One really nice thing is that it's a kind of motorway you have there. You have the final target to estimate your ecosystem service, but on your way you have several exits from this motorway where you can, of course, calculate very different results for different questions, like the extent of ecosystems or indicators on the quality of ecosystems and so on. So I think there's a lot of input we could receive from the Earth observation side to calculate these results. So my first question is,
I guess I guess you have a question to Bruno then.
Could you imagine of some typical Earth observation derived products that we could easily include or incorporate in our calculations?
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thanks, Sven, for the invitation, and Sven for the good question. I think if you look at ecosystem accounts, as you said, so they are composed, of course, of physical accounts and the monetary part, and obviously Earth observation, and they require geo or spatial explicit at least maps. So it's a bit like Christian said. So you have the maps, the statistics, and you need to make sure at least they are harmonized. So I mean, EO products obviously, I mean, contribute to the physical part, and they are spatial explicit, so they bring that information. Now, I think there are two ways how Earth observation data is currently used in the accounting. So one is you can use it as a proxy, at least, to kind of distribute the statistics, at least from the geospatial parts, that you can look at the maps and also, based on the maps, at least, take some land management decisions or whatever decisions you want to take from a policy perspective. On the other hand, you can also use some of the EO products directly, at least, to calculate statistics out of it. And I think that's a little bit the way we want to move into. But it really depends a bit on the type. So if you look, for instance, at the extent account, so which records the total area of each ecosystem, there you see land cover maps which are already derived from Earth observation coming in already for quite some time. So that's kind of, yeah, let's say a little bit more common use already of Earth observation products in the direct flow. Of course, if you start moving into more details, then you need habitat types, etc., etc. And I think their Earth observation is not yet on the level, at least, to provide that information at this stage. But okay, there is progress in that direction, so there is still room for improvement, I should say. Then, if you then move to the condition, for instance, so that when you look to the health of the ecosystem, there you see more a direct link. Yeah, so. I mean, in these condition indicators, you try to define a set of characteristics at a certain point in time, like describing the physical or the chemical state or the compositional state, functional, structural, whatever. At least in there are a lot of Earth observation indices, at least, or indices derived from Earth observation that directly contribute and feed that information, like normalize different water indexes, tree cover densities, chlorophyll to measure the photosynthetic activity. So they can be used immediately as kind of indicators for the condition account. And then the last part, what you said, okay, eventually the goal is to measure the service flow and to actually put money on these service flows, which is basically the benefit, so the supply-demand part. So there, it's still a little bit more difficult, because typically these accounts are still mainly based on the statistics which are available, and we are using mainly, at least, their Earth observation as a proxy. But it's not in all parts, because if you look, for instance, like provisional services, where you would, for instance, say, okay, what's the contribution of ecosystem to wood provision? Yeah, there you need to be sure, at least, that you take your statistics on timber, at least, and be compatible with it. I think you have some other, if you talk about like regulation service, like crop pollination, for instance, there are less statistics available for that one. So there, it's kind of using mainly models and trying to integrate some Earth observation, at least, to fill in that data gap. So that's why it's kind of a little bit of balance between different parts. So depending on exactly the type. that's
yeah, it's a very good summary, Bruno. I think you really put what are the potential and the challenges in using EO for the various accounts. I'm sure you have a question to Sven on the policy aspects. Huh?
Yeah, related to these challenges also, what you just said, at least. So I think, yeah, Kevin said just before, EO is a black magic in NSOs. He stated. So there are certainly a number of challenges, I think, that need to be addressed to integrate these Earth observation data in the production of the accounts. And as Mark said, the legislation is there, so the production is supposed to start yearly production in a couple of years, at least from a legislation perspective. So I would like to see at least what do you think are the main key elements that prevent you, or that prevent you at least to integrate these data sets, these EO data sets into the accounting part, and also what kind of, yeah, from an EU community perspective, yeah, where can we help you in that one? So what I mean, there are probably a lot of things where we can help, but what should we address first, basically?
I think it's quite new for us to work, or to really work with the geospatial data or with Earth observation data. We were used to use typical statistical data when calculating, for example, national accounts. Use of administrative data is quite common as well. But I think we are now faced with two problems. One is the amount of data, the size of the data sets. And the second is to process Earth observation data. The second thing, the processing of the observation data, is not done by us. We are cooperating with, for example, our national geographical institution that does pre-process certain satellite images already for us, so that we are using their products. And what is relevant for us in this cooperation is that we can rely on what they are doing. So and that's one of the important thing in such a cooperation. We need the security that the data is processed in a certain way, that we have the guarantee that it's objective and not manipulated by anyone who has an interest to manipulate it in one way or the other. And the second security we need is that we receive the data at certain points in time. So we do not need study data, so we need these kind of one-day flies, but we need to have the data on a regular basis. For example, every year, a data set that we can use for our accounts. But even if we use these pre-processed data set, they are quite huge, quite heavily for us to incorporate. So one challenge for us, of course, is to upgrade the capacity of our IT, that it can manage these amounts of data. I think these are the two main challenges we currently have. You said we have to set up a system because there is a new EU regulation upcoming. We've already started to set up the system. We already set up an extend account for the ecosystems, not only based on Earth observation data. We are basing this on Earth observation data we received from our National Geographical Agency, and on additional data. For example, we use data from various administrative sources to identify, for example, not only the land cover, but the land use of these areas we are looking at. So I think the key element in producing ecosystem accounting is that we have different options to use Earth observation data, for example, as one input for the ecosystem extend account, where it comes to land cover. And then we get several indicators, as you already mentioned, on ecosystem conditions that we can use for our processing to calculate the potential service of an ecosystem. And of course, for these indicators, and I think we have to be careful because we might hear the term indicators at several places or several stages in this this process. But for us input indicators, we of course have to have the same quality standards as for the ecosystem extent account. We need to know that the data is reliable and that it's there when we need it. And the last challenge we have, and I think that's not really linked to Earth observation, but to ecosystem accounts. Of course, one additional challenge we have is the knowledge of the function of ecosystems. I mean, statistical offices are not environmental offices, so there's of course a lot for us to learn in this area, how ecosystems work, how they work together, how ecosystem services influence each other. I think these are the main challenges we do have.
Thanks, Sven. I think you raise a number of very important points. Unfortunately, time is almost over, so I wanted to take a few questions. I like the question from Geoff Smith on are the cost of existing reporting and monitoring fully understood before we start considering Earth observation solutions. But unfortunately, we are really running out of time, and I'm sure that Monica will say that we need to stop at this point. So I want to thank really strongly all the panelists. We've seen that we've made progress, and we see that there are a number of success stories. We always mention the CAP, but there are other, I think on all the three topics, there are already cases where Earth observation is used, but there is a number of challenges that we still need to address, especially when we want to see how Earth observation can be integrated into national statistics. So it's questions of standardization, questions of trust, questions of security, size of data, and cost at the end. So thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to all panelists. And at this point, it's really past, so I can give the floor back to Monica for the last session.